You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. Force 13 Live, your witness to... Did that say Sally then at the bottom? That should be Teddy. Atlantic hurricane season, a rushed Atlantic hurricane season quite clearly, with a rush of activity. And not only do we have Teddy, but we have two Greek names active for the first time since 2005. Remember it well? No, I don't actually. Here we are in 2020 with a glut of tropical cyclones and many more on the way, most likely, considering that we are only 8 days beyond the typical peak of hurricane season, which means that there's potentially 3 more months of this before we reach the end of Atlantic hurricane season, and probably a good few more storms. There'll be a lot to talk about. In the meantime, we are dealing with just a few records broken today, such as a subtropical storm making landfall in Portugal, as it has just now, Alpha, or the third tropical storm to form in one day, that's Beta, and of course you had Wilfred, which formed earlier today, which seems like a distant memory already, in the eastern Atlantic, and you can still see Vicky's shadow up the northeast there as well. What's more, Paulette could reform, and one or two rumblings, and again, that's not supposed to be Sally, that's supposed to be Teddy, it will change in just a moment, and one or two rumours that maybe Sally actually might redevelop as well, but we'll see what our team have to say about that shortly. Once I get everything fixed and running properly here, we'll go ahead with the show, shall we? Let's introduce our team, consisting this hour of Isaac, Amy, Kay, Strat, and Samuel. Good afternoon, evening to you all.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Let's speak to Kay first of all. Your thoughts on the current Atlantic activity. Teddy dominates the Atlantic Ocean, really, and there's a lot more to say besides that.
Well, it's certainly an incredible time to be following the hurricane season, isn't it? We've had so many named storms this season. I've just found out that 23 named storms is the same as the entirety of the North Pacific this year, including the West Pacific and the East Pacific.
Wow.
The average for the Atlantic through to today is 8, and the average for the North Pacific is 30. So it tells a real picture, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So East and Western Pacific combined usually at 30 storms by now. Atlantic's usually at 8. Atlantic's at 22. Pacific is at, I think it's 23. Pacific's at 22.
Yes.
Almost as if the basins have swapped completely.
For the whole year. We didn't think it would go on for the whole year when we saw this quick early start, and there isn't much to compare this year to in terms of analogues and where we go from here. All I can really offer to you is not a very good comparison, and that would be 1933, which was one of the devastating hurricane seasons, one of the most active in the historic period, and that had some late September cyclones as well, quite severe ones, into October. So this season is absolutely not over, and well, all you have to do is look at the screen there. This is our newest tropical cyclone, Beta, and that could be even a hurricane threat for Texas. And models are all over the place, and Many of them have it stalling around that area, and we know what that's been like in recent years. Not very good. And it could arrive in Louisiana later on.
We've seen it with Harvey. You've definitely seen it with Imelda last year, but that could be kind of a strong. We could see a similar track to what Imelda took, but that intensity could be higher.
And you actually look at it right now. Just a moment. You actually look at it right now, and you can see there the northern side already delivering potentially rainfall to the areas that have just been impacted by not I'm getting it all wrong tonight. Sally. Strat?
Yeah, I mean, the pace that we're going at this year is absolutely unprecedented. Fortunately, most of the systems have been relatively weak. We've only had 2 major hurricanes so far, and I think, is it 6 or 7 hurricanes out of the 23 named storm? 8? Okay. I think, we've had 1 Category 2, 2 Category 4s, and the rest of them Category 1s to date. No, Paulette was Cat 2 as well. But my point being is, even though there's been an absurd amount of names, the ACE is still only a little bit above average compared to what you'd really expect.
Yeah, the ACE.
23 named storms.
The ACE is 12 days ahead.
Yeah, I mean, typically you'd expect, there's 23 named storms already. We're in the Greek alphabet in September.
Yeah.
ACE has to be, way over 100 or something like that. Very notably, though, we're only a little bit above the total from the first 7 storms from 2005, if you want a comparison. So even though we're outpacing the named storms by a month right now, which is very hard to believe, the ACE and the total strength has been less to date.
Yeah, accumulated cyclone energy, 12 days ahead of schedule, which isn't that much, compared to the Eastern Pacific, which is 37 days behind schedule, and the Western Pacific, which is a whopping 50 days behind schedule.
Yeah, I mean, that goes to case point. The Atlantic alone has been more active than the Western and Eastern Pacific combined, and the Central Pacific year to date, which is a very large rarity to see. That really doesn't just underscore the excessive activity in the Atlantic, but the complete lack of activity in both of the other basins in terms of named storms.
Yeah. I mean, this is the kind of season where you have to have just the right conditions, well, not just globally, but like within the basin for this many storms to develop. And one of them is the result of a pretty formidable La Nina pattern.
Some questions then. You can send your questions in live, by the way, during this hour of discussion on everything that's going on in the tropics. Start your message with Force 13 all in text on the chat. Will a Greek named storm become a Category 5? Well, now's a good chance as any, let's say. The Caribbean all the way through October remains a big risk and a threat.
And the only Category 5 in November happened in the West Caribbean as well.
Yeah, I'm good.
Although Lenny almost managed it.
That too,
So
but that was
close.
also in the Caribbean.
So close. Eastern Caribbean, and went the wrong way. Let's see what else we've got, though. There was a good one that I saw a moment ago. Well, actually, why has Florida been so lucky this season? I ought to explain that, don't say you've made it through yet in Florida by any means. There's still October, and that's quite often a bigger month than September is for Florida.
You are correct. The climatological peak for hurricane landfalls in South Florida is October, not September.
Yeah, and we did see some significant impacts in the Florida Panhandle from Sally. So whether or not that counts as Florida being whether Florida is being impacted or not impacted, it seems like Florida has kind of run out of luck, but not so much in the sense that they got a direct hit from any storms.
Yeah, and I know we've been talking a lot about the United States, but I do think it's important to mention while it lasts, because it is going to disintegrate very quickly right now, the unprecedented nature of Alpha's formation location and landfall spot, too. Isaac is muted right now. He's away for a little bit, but he's brought up the screen share of a satellite loop of Alpha making landfall north of Lisbon and moving inland.
Oh,
really
that's good,
something
'cause I don't have one.
extraordinary to witness.
Ah, there it is, yes. So you can see it there, subtropical cyclone, which made landfall north of Lisbon, somewhere towards the central part of Portugal there. Can't quite make out the text. And I believe, Kay, it spawned at least one tornado?
We've had 2 confirmed tornado reports.
2?
And yes, and one of them was caught on video, and it looks very impressive. I wouldn't be surprised if it were an F3.
Wow. Joshua Perez says 2005 is shaking right now.
I would disagree, given they'd had 3 Category 5s by this point. Or they're soon to have their 3rd.
And thanks very much for your support, by the way. I must say at this point that the support over the course of this year has really helped us. In fact, it's allowed us to start our first ever live stream in 4K on the automated stream, and in future, in the not too distant future, all of our commentaries will be in 4K resolution as well, so that's nice, as well as many other upgrades that are coming up very soon. So it's you know, we're doing the best we can, absolutely, and we're happy that you're on board with us. But right now, you're looking at the latest satellite imagery of Teddy. Recon are in there right now, aren't they?
They are, and surprisingly, they're not finding evidence for much above a 105 knots. And the reason why the NHC went with 110 is because the pressure hasn't changed that much. So they're assuming the winds won't have weakened so significantly.
And we've actually neglected to mention at this point that they just issued a tropical storm watch for Bermuda, didn't they?
Yes.
So that's a tropical storm watch. In fact, let's just get the cones up there. Here are the cones for Beta and Teddy. As you can see, they're expecting Beta to become a hurricane and then to make landfall, potentially make landfall in Texas or really skirt the coast. As for Teddy, they're expecting it to pass Bermuda, probably as a Category 2 if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, well to the east, but of course that's assuming weakening, and obviously in systems as strong as this and with an unpredictable nature at such high intensity, it could well be a major hurricane, or weaker than late show.
And then you've got the potential for impacts in Canada.
Yeah, it's not looking good for areas in Nova Scotia, particularly Halifax, and then on to Newfoundland. It really has the potential to be the most significant hurricane or post-tropical hurricane impact to Canada ever.
Are you sure?
I mean, it's definitely going to be one of the larger ones. You can say that with a pretty good level of certainty, so long as the current track holds. You know, the models have been splitting back and forth between how far east and west it's going to go. That's going to have big impacts down the line. You know, the fact that it's going to try to get looped around a little bit by this cutoff trough is going to make generally forecasting the exact direction a bit more difficult until it really begins that interaction a bit more. Then we'll be able to get a much clearer picture. Fortunately, right now, at least, if you're watching this from the northeast of the United States, New England in particular, models have really shifted quite heavily away from the solution of the pull from this cutoff low being strong enough to pull it all the way into New England. I know the Icon and European were trying to say that 2 to 3 days ago. That's really pulled off a good chunk, but we could be seeing a pretty significant hurricane or post-tropical hurricane strength impact in Atlantic Canada. Of course, Dorian came all the way up there as a Category 2 storm as it turned post-tropical and then made landfall near that intensity. This would probably be a bit different because forward speed will slow down quite significantly, at least in terms of latitude gain, as this cutoff low kind of rotates it around a bit. It's going to orient, maybe shoot a little bit out to the east at first before getting pulled sharper back to the west, and then realign itself and drag itself northward. But overall, Bermuda should be watching this closely in case the track deviates to the west and they end up getting hit by worse than just outer bands and tropical storm watches, which they have right now. That could easily be upgraded in the next 24 hours or so. And then after that, of course, Atlantic Canada needs to watch developments very closely because this could still be a Category 1 upper end or trying to reach into Category 2 status when it gets there, if it reaches the high end of the intensity envelope.
Now, late in the day over Teddy, and it's the sun's about to set there by the looks of things, but it's looking like it's got a good structure, and it looks like it could be starting to intensify again. I know some models, and we saw evidence that it was an eyewall replacement cycle earlier today, but model indications a few days ago at least, I'm not sure if that's still the case now, maybe one of you could tell me, depicted the possibility for more renewed strengthening from here on in until it gets close to Bermuda.
Recently, the guidance has backed off, and they sort of want it to maintain it for a bit and then weaken. It's a bit unusual, given it's still a day or so out from Paulette's cold wake. But they don't really do anything with it. So we'll see what Teddy decides to do, because it certainly has the environmental conditions to strengthen back into a Category 4 in the short term.
Absolutely. We were all thinking it was going to be a Category 5 the other day, didn't we?
It was certainly heading that way, but then we had this most recent eyewall replacement cycle, and that also allowed a bit of dry air.
Was
to
it
get
yesterday night? I'm losing track already.
It was last night. It's been
the night
forever.
just gone.
Yeah, last night, and briefly it had an eye temperature of 19 degrees Celsius. If it had held that for a while, you could have been looking at a Category 5. But it didn't, and we haven't. But I would certainly suggest that the peak of the storm, well, they went with 140, maybe 145 yesterday, and now it's about right for 125 miles an hour. Let's see if we've got any comments and questions. Well, I can tell you we've got loads, actually. I'll try my best. How far into the Greek alphabet will we get?
A long way.
Further than Zeta.
Yeah, I mean, you can't really pinpoint an exact end spot at this point, really. You know, I think a very important point to note is that this is the most amount of formed tropical cyclones named in a single month right now. We're at 9 after Beta's formation. Technically, Omar was named I'm pretty sure it was named at the start of September, but it was designated as a tropical storm back at the very end of August, so you can't really count that for this month. Regardless, 9 is a record for the month of September, and we're less than 3 weeks in. We still have 12 days left to go in this month, so we could reach double-digit named storms for the first time on record.
I think we will.
If we get just one more to spin up.
I think we'll get 2 or 3 more, you know.
I mean, it wouldn't be surprising.
The way it's looking, 2 or 3 more this month, most likely. When was the last time Canada was hit by a hurricane? Well,
Dorian.
Dorian came close.
There was Igor in 2010.
Yep, that's one of the memorable ones. Of course, there's Juan,
And
which
Noel.
some people have been drawing comparisons to. And I'm sure there's a few in the olden days, but I can't think of any that come to mind at the minute.
I believe Louis brought impacts to Canada in 95.
Yeah.
There will be some variance this year, though, because even if Teddy turns post-tropical 6 to 12 hours before it makes, more direct land impacts, it's very likely they will still maintain hurricane warnings or tropical storm warnings ahead of the storm after the rule changes in 2012 and 2013. So you might see this as, a barely post-tropical storm, and they keep the advisories up as it moves through just to keep public awareness there and safety a top priority. They did that with Dorian last year, so if it turns post-tropical a bit early, which is the indication right now as it's going to interact with this cutoff low, they'll probably keep the warnings up as tropical cyclone-related warnings regardless.
Yes, they will. What happens if we use up the Greek alphabet? Well, let me tell you, even in a worst-case scenario, that is to say, everything that the models even have a hint of developing become named storms, like what has happened this week, to be fair, will probably be 5 names from the end of the list. So I don't think we'll get to the end of the Greek alphabet, but if we do, we'll probably use surnames of National Hurricane Center personnel or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the Greek alphabet's 24 or 25 letters
24
long,
letters.
about. Yeah, 24, so you'd need to get to 45 plus named storms to get rid of that naming list. Even though this season's been extraordinarily active, it'd be near impossible to reach that unless, like Nathan said, every single storm that the models gave a 10% chance of developing through and developed.
Now, I was just kidding about the NHC staff, but I would imagine, but I don't know what they would do. they might go on to the next naming list. I don't know.
There's never been a plan put in place for such an eventuality because I believe even the most active West Pacific season didn't get that far.
That's true indeed. Beta's track looks like the hurricane management exercises from a couple of months ago. For those who don't know, we did sort of like an exercise where some of our team predicted simulated storms. I don't remember one hitting Texas.
No, it was for Florida specifically.
Yeah, it was Florida. But yeah.
The
yes.
interesting thing about Beta is that some models are indicating it could be still a hurricane out over the Gulf 10 days from now in the very same spot it is at the moment.
One model said that in particular, didn't it?
Yes, that was the Canadian model, the 00.
Which at the moment is better than GFS.
Believe it or not.
I mean, regardless of anything that far out right now, though, I think obviously the most important thing, you'll probably start to see rainfall forecasts come from the Weather Prediction Center in probably 2 days or so, if not slightly less than that, is that by day 3 or even 2.5, this thing is going to be right near the Texas coastline and moving almost nil, very slowly drifting northwards to the current forecast for at least 2 days until it's either just on the coastline on Wednesday afternoon or just offshore of it.
I
So you're
gotta
still
say,
a very dangerous potential rainfall situation for portions of coastal Texas, and potentially further inland based on how the system evolves in size and structure.
Well,
when
there's also potential rainfall for East Texas and Louisiana due to a precursor rainfall event due to the Gulf moisture being drawn up into the temperature gradient there.
that's
That could
happening
cause
right now.
flooding. Yeah, so that could lead to flooding well away from the centre of Beta that's still associated with it.
But let me tell you here, on the cone there, what you can see right now, low confidence, because the cone is large, low speed, low movement speed. All the forecast points are almost stuck together. They don't really know what's going to happen, and that usually means that it's going to stall somewhere, and that is not good news.
Fortunately, the core won't be onshore, so it's not racking the center.
It could be, though, anywhere within that cone it could
that's
stall.
True. I think the most important thing, though, is for people using this not to pay attention to the exact spot where the National Hurricane Center just has their forecast point for the center, because it could be anywhere in that at that time period, and potentially even out of that if something did happen.
I mean, if you follow the right-hand outline of the cone, it stays way off for the whole time, and if it follows the left-hand side, then you'll probably get a storm that develops into a hurricane and makes landfall near the border, and you won't hear anything else from it probably if it did that.
No, but I mean, so long as it stays near the coast or just inland, the issue is going to be that it's going to continue to be able to rake in moisture from the Gulf of Mexico in between days 3 to 5. That's where you could unfortunately see some of those coastal rainfall totals pick up a lot. And like Kay said, some of this moisture is already being pulled off a little bit because there is a little bit of wind shear with a trough right now. That's going to be lifting away and weakening, which is going to allow it to basically meander where it is in the northwestern Gulf of Mexico for probably most of the next half a week plus. But that's already causing rainfall and general cloud cover over portions of the United States.
Do we think that Paulette could reform near the Azores?
Absolutely. GFS has been wanting it every single run since Paulette went extratropical.
Yeah, you can just about see its influence off the top of the screen. Can't see it fully there.
I mean, what is it? It's 40% right now for redevelopment in the next 5 days. Honestly, the models some models at least are very supportive for it. A couple try to get it there, but just have it die off from other environmental impacts first. Regardless, though, it wouldn't be surprising to see it happen. Some of the models have been ticking on it for quite a while, and if it does, the Azores should generally be paying attention for it anyways, just as the extratropical low, which is Paulette's remnants, passes through the area in the next 24 to 48 hours regardless. But definitely an interesting area to watch to see if we get redevelopment.
Let's just very briefly take a look around the world, a little sightseeing tour. This is the Eastern Pacific. It's quite dead. The remnants of Karen are there over the open waters, and a little blob there that could develop into a weak tropical cyclone in the Central Pacific. We'll see what happens with that. The Western Pacific, as you can see, is a graveyard. Tropical Storm Nul made landfall early this morning in Vietnam. It's now moved well inland, very disorganized, monsoonal almost really. Its rainfall might be felt in places like India and Bangladesh. Also, you can see on the right-hand side there, or in the center of the screen, a little disturbance that could develop into a tropical storm and will recurve east of Japan. But apart from that, West Pacific, well, not just the West Pacific, it's a whole dead Pacific. All we've got is the Atlantic. And I think that will be enough to keep us busy for quite a long time in a season that we won't want to dwell on for too long by the looks of things, the way it's going.
Absolutely not. And just another extra record on top of, all these earliest formations, easternmost formation on record there with Alpha today, is that this is the first time as well there's been 3 separate storms named within a 24-hour time period. And it wasn't 24-hour time period even for this. It was within a 6-hour time period too. So it is a very unique time that we're in right now to witness this all happen.
Was it not 12 hours?
Was it? Unless I'm being ridiculous, I'm pretty sure Wilfred formed at 11 a.m. this morning, right?
Did it?
It formed at 11, I think.
Well, there you go. 6 hours feels like 12 hours to me.
Yeah. So was it Wilfred formed at 11 a.m. Eastern time, I'm saying. Alpha formed at 12:30 p.m. Eastern time, and now Beta's here at 5 p.m. Eastern time. So that 6-hour time period's had 3 storms named. Just the rarity behind that is obscene. Hopefully we never see a season like this again for a very, very long time. But while we're here, we just got to continue to talk about everything as we go, because even though Wilfred, fortunately, shouldn't be anything significant to land, it's supposed to dissipate well before the Lesser Antilles. Beta's impacting land right now with some of its rainfall getting pulled away, and should impact Mexico, Texas, and parts of the Gulf Coast in the coming days. We got Teddy, which is one of the last non-Greek named storms active now. I think it has watches in Bermuda now, right? Or was that
Tropical Storm Watch?
Yeah, Tropical Storm Watch is there, and it's likely impacted Atlantic Canada. And we have Alpha moving inland in Portugal for the first subtropical or tropical landfall with tropical storm force winds in Europe from an Atlantic basin storm.
Officially, but I maintain that there was a storm in October 1997 that did the same.
Yes, and quite coincidentally, while we have subtropical storm Alpha impacting Portugal, we also have a Mediterranean tropical cyclone that's impacting Greece.
And
quite
that's
ironic.
Still going, is it?
Yes.
Yeah. Do we have any satellite imagery of that?
I don't
today?
have that, but it is winding down. I saw that earlier.
Did it end up making? I think it made landfall in Greece in the end, right?
Probably.
We believe it did, yes. Someone looked at that last night and determined the centre had moved over an island.
Anyway, we're still looking at Beta on the screen. I've got to take some questions because there's loads flooding in. Can Beta bring tropical storm force winds to Houston, if possible? It absolutely could. I think right now, let me just double check this. Houston has about something like a 17% chance of tropical storm force winds in 5 days.
And
of
it's
course,
supposed to be around for longer than that.
Yep, 18% in 5 days. That's going to rise because in 5 days the storm's not expected to have reached Houston by that point.
Yeah, as the storm gets closer and the time period winds down, both in time frame and actual miles away, those odds tick up quite significantly if it's more likely to get impacts. They'll tick down significantly if you're expected to be further away. Because the general expectations of the system right now, unless it deviates more significantly to the south and ends up trying to make landfall closer to the Texas-Mexico border, it would be more likely than not based on how they get caught up.
That's what I've been seeing from the UK model and the GFS. They've been taking it right up to the coast between Brownsville and Corpus Christi, just about hitting it, and then moving back out to sea and becoming a hurricane.
Yeah, I noticed the GFS and European, and I'm not sure about all the other models yet, but it is going to be something to watch potentially. Try to have it hug the coast of Texas around day, 3 to 4, and then ride up the whole Texas coastline. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that develops.
Yeah.
It's going to be much more track dependent right now, at least, to see if Houston will end up getting tropical storm force winds, and unfortunately, because the track forecast is lower confidence than usual, because the, you know, less, not less strong, but weaker steering currents, we're not really going to have a full answer for a little bit. But if you're in Houston, it's definitely at least a rainfall threat to monitor right now, and I'd advise you continue to monitor it.
More questions here. When do you think Gamma or the next storm will form? They're not even confident it'll be called Gamma. That's such this season is. But, well...
There is an AOI
there is.
coming off Africa.
Another area of interest off Africa could develop in about 3 or 4 days?
Yes. But in the longer term, we're getting rumblings that there might be a West Caribbean system in early October.
Yes.
Seems ripe for development.
Wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. Hurricane Andrew has sent a message saying, make cooking strat part 2, please.
Maybe in the off season. I think we're a bit busy right now.
Well, actually...
Get to the satire stuff, but we'll get back to that eventually, I think.
Well, we do have a potential treat that I could be giving to you guys if we get 30 plus named storms, and that will be...
Wait, what's this?
Yes. I will... If I said that if we had 30 or more named storms, that I would be making Strat the movie.
Oh my goodness. Anyway, that's a discussion probably for tomorrow night on Force 13 Sundays. Anyway, do we think...
Friday.
Oh yeah, it's still Friday. In 2 nights' time, Force 13 Sundays, you know, we're all over the place. We're probably going to be live tomorrow with storm updates and live on Sunday with Force 13 Sundays and what have you. Do you think any more storms could hit Europe?
Not as a tropical cyclone. But we could get some extratropical systems moving across the Atlantic under the jet stream.
Will we see a similar track to Allison 2001 from Beta?
I think it's going to be uniquely its own.
Uh-huh.
Not many systems I can think of has formed near the Bay of Campeche, moved northeast, then turned west, then gone back east, and then turned northeast towards the Texas-Louisiana border while becoming a hurricane.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of difference.
Some 1995 storm hybrids might qualify.
Yeah, well, I think the difference is Allison formed well further north and moved inland within 24 hours of formation.
And it was
a
early
lot
season.
of its damage came that it basically stalled out over the same portion of Texas for over half a week before pulling back out into the Gulf of Mexico again, and then coming across Louisiana as remnant system, and then of course coming across southeast United States and off the sea. This is forming further south. It's not expected to have full land interaction with the United States, at least in terms of its core center. Outer bands and convective activity are already reaching onshore because of wind shear pulling some of the convection away. But that's not really the core of the system directly coming onshore, and that really isn't expected for a significant period of time right now. Even if it just plows onshore, that would still be 2.5 to 3 days away, and this system's already been active for about a day or so. So it is a different circumstance. Because of the sheer amount of strange storms that we've seen form this year, there's not really a ton of great analogs for some of them. There's none for Alpha, for one, as an example of just how crazy things are right now. But regardless of, similarities to other systems in the past, it is very important that regions in far northern Mexico and Texas and Louisiana are monitoring this very closely, because its exact setup of where it really decides to stall out in its westward motion at around day 3, whether that's just inland, just offshore on the coast, and tries to move northward a bit, is going to be pretty crucial for some rainfall totals down the line, so people should be keeping a close eye on that.
And I already lost my train as I was just going to say that, but storms, obviously, we've got so many unique tracks at the moment. People love to compare things to other things. It's not the wisest thing to do in storm tracking circles.
Yeah, I think when we're talking about storms, it's good data points sometimes to see, similar environment, similar time of year, maybe a storm can move a similar direction. That's used sometimes in forecasting. But when we have computer models and stuff like that, and of course recon data, buoys, other observations, those really take precedence, current data over past data first. And, it's also another reminder that the exact intensity of the storm doesn't really matter so much as the, total damage forecast. Because you could have, a storm become a minimal hurricane like Beta's forecast is right now. But if it were just, clipping the coast to somewhere, and then rushing out to sea very quickly, of course, wouldn't have similar impacts to, say, Allison of 2001, which was weak tropical storm in terms of its wind strength, but because it stalled over the same place for several days, brought very severe impacts.
Has a Greek name been retired? No, not yet. Could happen this year. I didn't think we'd have that kind of conversation, but it could happen. And if it does happen, they acknowledge the retirement, but they use the name again if there's a next time, basically. Never made full sense to me, but there you have it. Devon's proposition is that when you reach the end of the alphabet, you just roll over to the next naming list, and at the start of the next season, you continue on the letter from the previous season, like to do in Australia. I think that's a better idea.
Yeah, I mean, if we end up with more seasons like this, it's a real conversation to have. But hopefully, we don't have more seasons like this.
It's just a better idea anyway. People aren't that dumb that they have to roll all the way back to A. I think it's insulting intelligence a little bit. People know that, okay, we've had the W name storm, or, well, let's say the V name storm, so next season it'll be the W name storm that starts off.
Basically.
Maybe we should do a poll about that. Anyway, more questions. Could the Atlantic be the most active basin this year? I think it's already done that. Will post-tropical cyclone Paulette redevelop? 40% chance still on that?
Yeah.
Didn't Beta of 2005 come close to retirement? It did. Category 3 that struck Central America. What is the most active Western Pacific season on record? Well, it depends on your metrics, but most people see it as 1964 with 39 tropical storms. I think we've recently assessed 1967 to also have 39 storms, and 1939 with 38 or 39 storms, I can't remember now, in our reanalysis. What happens if we run out of Greek names? Don't talk about it. We're living in a what might have been season. Well,
pretty much.
You'll see the what might have been season at the end of the year. Teddy looks like it's intensifying. What is it doing? Any news on Teddy?
I would concur. There's some microwave imagery that I've shared if you wanted to bring that up, Nathan. And since Recon last gave us a report that said the eye wall was partially open, it's got a very solid ring now, as of an hour ago.
Oh, here we go. Let's just get this on the screen. So, talk us through this image.
It has a very potent inner eye wall.
Oh, wow.
No signs of a gap or indeed an eye wall replacement cycle.
Strad, are you seeing that?
It's pretty much perfect for re-intensification, and the result, the corresponding infrared satellite imagery has also been improving in recent minutes.
Yeah,
and it looks like the next recon that's heading in now may find a stronger storm.
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me at all based on that microwave imagery, and if it holds that ring of minus 70s mostly around. Teddy's had multiple times in his lifespan where it's had a ring of minus 70s and then quickly given it up, at least the full encirclement around the center around after an hour or two or so. If it holds this for a few hours through the next recon flight, it would be the most consistent in terms of, cooler eye temperature or cooler eyewall temperatures that we've seen in the cloud tops throughout the storm's entire lifespan. And that eyewall is looking quite impressive. So despite some of the struggles it's had, it definitely looks like it's going to be trying to improve a bit, and it already has been. The eye's trying to clear up again after almost completely filling earlier. I think an important thing to note with Teddy, too, alongside, its general strength threat for Bermuda and Canada, is the track it's taking is also unprecedented, too. So we have quite a few storms that are doing things that really haven't happened before. There hasn't really been a storm that's come up, from the south, moved east of Bermuda, and then hooked into Nova Scotia and Atlantic Canada. That's incredibly rare to see potentially happen in the coming days. So, again, with this season, continuously throwing curveballs in all kinds of ways.
One of our Discord moderators, Sohum, asks a question as well, a discussion which you were involved with, Kay, whether 1887 would be a better analogue than 1933 for 2020, and our thoughts on this. Personally, I couldn't say either way because there's not enough data that far back for my liking. What do you think, Kay?
Well, what happened was there was a project where they reanalyzed the season and they came up with as many as 30 possible tropical storms and hurricanes. And
I still find that dubious.
They
but-
submitted that to the experts for a verification, which hasn't happened yet. But
Well,
regardless,
if that happens, it happens.
the official statistics as it currently stands are 9 tropical cyclones, of which 5 were hurricanes between the start of October and the end of the year.
Wow.
With 2 of those being active hurricanes in the month of December.
So we're in for the long haul.
Especially given it is the only season with a comparable West African monsoon to 2020.
Why is there no names for X, Y, or Z? That is a good question that you'll have to direct to the National Hurricane Center. Back in 1983, they had a scare in the Eastern Pacific when the naming list got up to the letter W. So at the end of that year, they decided to add in X, Y, and Z for the Eastern Pacific. And when it happened in the Atlantic in 2005, for some reason they didn't think about that and they went to Greek names.
I guess the difference really is that climatologically, the Eastern Pacific's typically more active by an okay margin. The average Atlantic season is 12 to 13 named storms. That usually gives you a wiggle room of 8 to 9 left. So I guess they assumed, 2005 is much more of a one-off in occurrence. We really shouldn't see this again ever, or if it somehow happens, it'll be extremely rare and it'll only be a one-off again. Maybe in the future they have to reevaluate that.
So now it's 2 off.
It is a 2-off now, I guess. But maybe in the future they have to reevaluate how they approach it, or just rolling the naming lists continuously rather than starting a new one each year. Hopefully though we don't ever see a season like this ever again. Though it's really important to note just the pace of named storms, even though many of them haven't been quite strong, has really been something that we haven't seen in recorded history before, let alone in the satellite era.
It's also important to note that a lot of the storms this year have sort of snuck under the radar of ACE, so to speak. They've rapidly intensified up to landfall and therefore not had a long track of the high intensity. You had Hannah, which went from a tropical depression to a hurricane in less than 3 days, I believe. You had Isaiah strengthening up to landfall. You had Sally strengthening up to landfall. Laura up to landfall. And in fact, currently we stand at 8 US landfalls this season. The record is 9, set in 1916, and Beta seems likely to tie that.
1916 was quite a year as well.
In terms of US landfalls and impacts to land, this season certainly isn't below average.
Yeah, and also to locations that don't normally see multiple impacts in 1 year. The Northeast saw 2 impacts earlier on in the season. They saw Faye and Isaias come up the seaboard and impact the Northeast. Isaias, of course, much more significant in that regard. And then we've really had a plethora of storms, like Kay said, just come on shore, either strengthening up to landfall at the last moment, like Laura, which became from Category 1 to Category 4 high end of that within 24 hours, or Hannah, which went from a tropical depression to a hurricane at landfall in about 36 to 48 hours or so as well. A lot of these storms just kind of snuck up. Fortunately, at least, though, the lower ACE number compared to what you'd expect with 23 named storms is an indicator that many of these have just been, low-end Category 1 storms or tropical storms. We've had a lot of systems form in non-tropical origin ways off the East Coast and then just shoot out to sea. I think we have at least 3 or 4 of those this year alone, and we're not even in October yet.
Equally, it is true that every significant hurricane this system has affected land.
That is an unfortunate thing to it.
Yeah.
Well, Marco kind of died before it really made landfall. I guess that's really the exception.
Okay, Marco.
But it did have significant impacts in Central America and Jamaica before it even became a hurricane, too. So, even though it wasn't impacting land at its peak, it still had land impacts that were significant during its lifespan. So, it's not just the U.S. that has seen adverse impacts throughout the season. The Lesser Antilles saw both Laura and Isaias tear through large portions of the Greater and Lesser Antilles, bringing very heavy rainfall totals. So it's been quite a damaging year overall.
I should point out there's some questions about what we're doing on Force 13 in the future, say the end of the season into next year, some of the things that we often do or did. Can't comment on any of that right now. I'll let you know, or we'll let you know somewhere when a decision's made. Sorry about the vagueness there. Have models ever predicted an eye wall replacement cycle?
Absolutely. I believe the HWRS perfectly predicted the eye wall replacement cycle of 2 of the recent West Pacific typhoons that were headed towards the Korean Peninsula.
Wow.
I mean, computer models are way more advanced now than they were in the past. So even though it's harder to actually, forecast an eye wall replacement cycle until indications, are apparent that it's trying to begin, when you see concentric eye walls start to form, computer models have gotten better at trying to say, okay, storms really rapidly intensify and it's very strong. Here's a point where that might start to occur. They're doing a similar thing now as well as dry air entrailment. Computer models in the past weren't nearly as proficient as saying, okay, this system's entering this environment, dry air might get wrapped into the center a bit more and cause, more direct struggles. They're getting better at that. And that's one of the reasons that even though the track forecast for beta is quite unclear, there's been consistent discussion about dry air entrailment into the center because of computer model indications.
Well, I think it's a guarantee that it's going to be a resilient storm.
Teddy is definitely improving in structure continuously. Its eye wall has begun circularizing, which is a hallmark of a strengthening system.
You can quite clearly see it here on the satellite imagery.
Yes, Devon, our chief analyst, says that its satellite appearance has improved massively, and he wouldn't be surprised if it tries to make a run for Category 5.
I wouldn't be surprised either. Let me just get a little handle on this. See if I can take a look at the eye temperature at the start of this hour compared to now.
If it really does that in that regard, at least in doing it out more in the open sea, it'd be quite similar to Lorenzo of last year, even though locations are different. A strong Category 4 initial peak, then some weakening due to eye wall replacement cycles and general structural problems, and then another run up towards the actual peak intensity that the storm would have in its lifespan. So we could see something similar to that thing.
So 4 hours ago, the eye temperature was -15, and now it is +7.
And we now have a full ring of -70s once again.
On satellite appearance alone, which is what gave Lorenzo Category 5, by the way, because Recon got in at the wrong times, then you could call that a high-end Category 4. Obviously we know better, because Recon, what are they getting right now? Barely Category 3, was it?
As Recon left, it supported 120 to 125 miles an hour. The new Recon's heading in now, and we'll see what it finds.
So we're probably looking at a minimal Category 4 again here, then.
Most likely, although it could be going higher.
I would note as well, not just for people in Bermuda and Atlantic Canada that need to watch this very closely, because of course tropical storm watch in Bermuda and Atlantic Canada's very likely at this point to get some sort of impacts. Whether or not that's hurricane strength or fully tropical or not is still up in the air, and they need to keep a close eye and up to the date with the latest information with that. But if you're on the eastern seaboard, even though the storm won't be coming directly your way at all, from Florida all the way up to Maine, those areas alongside, northern parts of the Greater Antilles and the Bahamas, Turks and Caicos, will be seeing, much higher, surf and rip currents over the next few days that can and will be life-threatening. Obviously, we've seen many storms out to sea that are very strong, even much further east than the current location that Teddy has, that have caused loss of life along the U.S. East Coast and other land areas because of the rip currents and swells that they produce. So please, if you're out there, I know the past couple days have been very nice weather. There's this very strong area of high pressure set up over the east part of the United States and Canada, but exercise extra caution and just generally be safe and try to avoid the water for the next couple days as this thing kicks up swells and dangerous rip currents.
Even Lorenzo caused dangerous rip currents, didn't it?
I believe Lorenzo resulted in the deaths of a couple of people on the US East Coast when it was all the way out in the other side of the ocean.
Yeah, and that's why I'm mentioning it explicitly here, because, this storm is, Category 3, could be getting back up to Category 4 strength soon. it will, and it's been noted in headlines before on the update statement of the National Hurricane Center, generate dangerous surf and rip currents along the eastern seaboard of the United States, Atlantic Canada, and very likely portions of the northern Greater Antilles as well along the northern coast. So if you're in those areas, like I said, I know the weather's been great with this high pressure area that's been set up over much of the eastern United States and Canada, but just avoid really going into the water, because even if it's not the most likely in your exact location, it's always better to be safe rather than do something risky, because these things are dangerous even if they're way far out because of the impacts they can produce with swells and rip currents.
And it's not just strong systems that have been causing dangerous rip currents. I believe Vicky resulted in 1 death due to rip currents. Cristobal killed 1 person with rip currents. Not just the big storms that do it, the little ones can do it as well.
Lots of intriguing comments right now. One call to action there wants to make Marcel control Force 13 for 1 hour. That might be quite disastrous.
Oh, that was his birthday. It happened already.
Ages ago, yeah. Can we explain what eye temperature means when it comes to development of a hurricane? I should have explained that because I often do, but I didn't on that occasion. Well, the eye temperature indicates a warming eye. Okay, the satellites, when they're pointing down at the storm, obviously they take the temperature of the highest cloud top because that's the first point of detection for the satellite. So you can see the highest cloud tops there. It's measuring temperature, but it actually correlates more to the heights of the cloud tops. Obviously, upper in the atmosphere, higher in the atmosphere, the temperature's colder. So the further down you can see, the higher temperature it is. So in the eye, you've got positives because that's down near the surface. If you saw all the way down to the surface, you'd be looking at over 20 degrees Celsius, 30 degrees Celsius maybe. It does happen in some of the strongest storms. So to be up to positives at 7 degrees Celsius right now, that's usually a sign at least of category 4.
Yeah, I mean,
at least in this scenario. Sometimes you can get high latitude systems that have more clear eyes but much less strength.
I mean, I guess really the best way to state it in like the simplest terms is that when you see a hurricane that's generally strong and its eye has positive temperatures on satellite imagery, at least recon which is actually getting direct temperature observations, will hold variance to satellite estimates. But when
as you look on here, clearer, if it looks clearer, then I can pretty much guarantee you that it's warmer.
Yeah, usually when you're looking at satellite imagery alone, the warmer the eye is, that's indicating that the storm is stronger. Same thing with colder cloud tops around the eye wall as well. If it's a colder eye, so more clouded over, satellites saying, oh, it's in the minus 20s, minus 30s, and the cloud tops around the eye are not as cold. So let's say those cloud tops are minus 50s instead of minus 70s, then you'd be looking at a weaker storm in comparison.
On this wide shot, you can see what's left of Paulette now sinking past the Azores and just moving over the westernmost islands there shortly. It's still got a little bit of convection pointing out the eastern side and chances of redevelopment. We saw another question there about whether we think it will do it.
It seems very reasonable, given it's got model support and good conditions, and it's going to be sitting around for a while over supportive sea surface temperatures.
And if it does do it, models are suggesting that it'll stall a little bit south of the Azores, or be uncertain where it goes. Then it might move through the Azores, or it might pass east. But in most scenarios, it gets sucked up to the northeast and turns post-tropical in rather short shrift there.
Yeah, I mean, the 18Z GFS run's coming out right now.
Ah.
It's only 2 hours, but it does have an 1006 millibar, either subtropical Paulette or barely extratropical Paulette south of the Azores. Generally, though, the trend compared to a few days ago when models were trying to say the high-pressure system would, shove it further south and allow it to have a longer lifespan has generally gave way towards expectations that it'll be weaker and shorter as to be able to try to escape out towards the east and north, unlike prior indications. So there is some difference there, and that small difference in the model expectations will probably have more significant impacts on the actual future lifespan of the
a few questions there on whether Paulette will keep its name. Don't worry, it would. It would keep its name if it redeveloped. What does subtropical storm mean, and why are there no subtropical hurricanes? There are actually a small exclusive club of subtropical hurricanes. I think there's 4, but I don't know if anyone wants to answer the first question, more prominent question there.
I guess I'll go for it a little bit, just because it's some conversation. So, subtropical storm is a storm that has some tropical characteristics. So, either a core that's warm but not symmetric, like you'd have with a normal tropical cyclone, like Hurricane Teddy, for instance. It wouldn't be as symmetrical, and the banding would, for example, not be as uniform. So you might see, larger wind field more displaced away from the center, for example.
Yep, and some of those storms that did reach hurricane winds while subtropical. I think there was one in the Atlantic in 1979. I think there was one in the 60s. There was a...
You would argue that Alex 2016 was a subtropical hurricane.
Well, I'm not sure. It's been a while since I've looked all this up now. I think it was Joel in 2010 or something like that in the South Indian Ocean. And there was one more, which I cannot remember at this point.
And that actually makes Alpha pretty unique in its existence, too, as a subtropical cyclone, because its convective, organization, as was shown by its banding features, was, definitely characteristic of full tropical cyclone, but its core wasn't as typical for what you'd use for designation. It was, much more neutral, so it was much more borderline between warm and cold core than typical for a subtropical designation, which is typically, a storm with an asymmetric warm core that has winds displaced away from the center and a non-tropical looking cloud pattern. It was kind of the opposite in terms of characteristics for this system. So, it can really go both ways, I guess, when you're designating subtropical systems. It doesn't just have to be a broader wind field and a less tropical cloud pattern, but a more tropical core. I guess we really learned from today and how they're designating systems that it can actually go the other way around as well.
And a few people wondering whether Alpha will survive into the Bay of Biscay. It really shouldn't.
We had this earlier. It's already disintegrating over Iberia now. It's probably going to dissipate and then get quickly absorbed into another larger extratropical low that it's been partially embedded in for most of its lifespan.
Would a hurricane dissipate if the eye wall temperature hit the same as the sea surface temperature? What a curious question. Well, before that, the eye wall would certainly collapse, but the cloud tops, they could still be in the minus 40s, 50s by the time the storm dissipates. It's not, whether a storm dissipates or not, is more reliant on structure than clouds. And that's most of the questions at this late stage. Anything else that our team would like to discuss right now, because our hour is up?
Just really, a note for people that are either along, the Gulf Coast or even more interior in some of the southeastern United States, including Texas, all the way to, Florida, and even up in towards, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina now with this, rain bands from Beta, and people in Atlantic Canada and Bermuda watching Teddy. Just, the exact locations for some of these things aren't quite certain yet, because of course there's deviation at the day 5 mark. Even day 3 mark can have some or pretty large discrepancies at times. But if you're in an area that is set right now to potentially be impacted, make sure you're monitoring the developments very closely of either of the systems. Both of them have the potential to be significant wind and rain makers that can cause damage wherever they come near shore or on shore at, if they do. So in general, just pay attention if you're potentially set up. Make sure you have your plan in place if necessary, and stay safe.
And breathe.
And if you're outside the immediate threat from one of the current systems, don't let your guard down. You've still got 2.5 months of the season to go, and I would not be surprised if we see further significant land impacts from one or more tropical cyclones.
Well, thanks for getting involved to my team here, Amy, Kay, Strat, and Sam. Thanks for joining me tonight, and thanks to everyone else who has joined us for this hour of discussion as well. We will be doing, or I will be doing, a tropical weather bulletin in 2 hours time, so that will be a upload on our YouTube channel, so look out for that. I'm sure people will be excited to see it. That will have all the latest, and we will probably be live at least once tomorrow. We don't know yet. We've not got the schedule sorted out. Usually it happens with just a few hours notice, but hey, that's what subscribe button's for. You can certainly do that, and all the latest uploads and scheduled uploads will be up there for you, and also on our social media platforms on Facebook and Twitter. Search Force 13. You can also join our interesting Discord server, which has over 1,100 members at this point, so there's plenty of people to chat to about hurricanes and the general world of weather. Discord.gg/Force13. David, you're on the air.
I hate to do it, but breaking news. We've had a magnitude 6.8 earthquake central mid-Atlantic ridge, and it's 33 kilometres deep.
That sounds like it's out to sea.
Yeah, it's a bit South America, actually on the equator, would you believe?
Would you believe it?
So, apology for breaking in, but magnitude 6.8, and you can switch over to the earthquake channel with the latest information. And Papua New Guinea's had a magnitude 5.2, so the activity is actually increasing. So, magnitude 6.8.